And welcome back to News All Day. Thanks so much for staying with us. A pretrial hearing in the state's case against Luigi Mangione continues today. He faces state and federal charges for the 2024 killing of United Healthcare CEO Duane St. The hearing today focuses on evidence seized by police during Mangione's arrest last year in a Pennsylvania McDonald's. Now, over the weekend, the Manhattan DA's office released new photos of that evidence. Items in the photos include a piece of paper with a to-do list, a Greyhound bus ticket, and a folding knife that prosecutors say was pulled from Mangione's pockets. However, these are among the items that Mangione's lawyers say should be excluded from the trial. Joining me now to talk more about this and is criminal defense attorney and former Manhattan prosecutor Jeremy Saland. Jeremy, good to see you. So talk to us about the significance of the Manhattan DA releasing the photos of this evidence here.
Well, it's giving a preview of what is really at stake here, because a lot of this evidence is essential to their case. Not critical, meaning that they cannot proceed without it, but it gives the public the understanding of what is it that the defense is trying to suppress. What is it that the prosecution is trying to bring in? It shows maybe motive, it shows intent, it shows a lot and demonstrates that ultimately for identification purposes too, that Mangione is the guy that the prosecution believes is the one responsible for this homicide.
And remind our viewers of why the defense thinks that this should be excluded from the trial and how strong their case is in potentially getting that excluded.
So there's two pieces here. Let's deal with first the statement. The statement was this what we call a custodial interrogation? Meaning at the time that Mangione was questioned, or was he questioned, interrogated, was he in custody? Because if he was, then there needs to be Miranda warnings. And if those Miranda warnings were required and not given, then those statements would be suppressed. It would not come in. It would not mean that the case is dismissed. It would not mean that the case is over. Just that certain things that he said that were a product of that custodial interrogation would not come in. Again, don't need to be in handcuffs for that purposes. The other piece is, even if there was probable cause to arrest, did the police go too far and search that bag without a search warrant? And did they need to have a search warrant to ultimately recover that firearm? That's a big question here. Or alternatively, for example, was it in his reachable area and there was a safety concern, an exigent issue that the police had to address immediately?
If this evidence is dismissed for the trial, is that a big problem for the prosecution, or is there enough for them to work with otherwise?
It's a problem, but there's still plenty of evidence there. It does not suppress that video surveillance that demonstrates that, if true, that Mangione is the murderer. There's another piece too that was being brought in by the prosecution. There were statements allegedly made by Mangione while in corrections, while in custody, where he said, supposedly based on the prosecution on his own, that he had this 3D firearm, and some other questions about the coverage. This could come in and bolster the case even if there's a failure on the part of the prosecution to establish that the search was reasonable and proper, as well as the statements that were taken.
Of course, this is such a high-profile case, so the pretrial hearings have been getting a lot of media attention. But is a thorough pretrial hearing, days of pretrial hearings, typical for a case like this?
You don't usually find it in days, but also the magnitude and the amount of evidence in a particular case, you find that in evidence. Let's think of a case, for example, if there was a drug bust. Well, if you lose that drugs, if you lose the recovery and that improper search, you may lose that case. Here, you have, 20 potential witnesses in that neighborhood? That is atypical. Over a week in time, that is atypical. And the reason why, though, is because the prosecution really recognizes, as a defense, that this evidence is critical, and losing this evidence one way or another, or winning this evidence to get it in, is really central to the case. Does it mean it will rise and fall without it? No. But it's certainly pivotal.
We continue to remind our viewers as well, he also has these federal charges against him, Luigi Mangione. What, if any way, does this impact that federal case? Can we glean anything from what happens here based on how that's going to maybe affect the federal case?
You certainly can, but there are different standards and rules. So the law in New York, for example, the inevitable discovery, may be slightly different, and critically so, than what you would have in a federal case. So there's certain things that are important, meaning there's going to be testimony from the same potential witnesses at both hearings and eventually both trials. So that is important, and prosecutors on the federal level are no doubt looking at it. But what happens in this case certainly is relevant, but won't necessarily dictate what will happen in the federal case.
Jeremy, in our final moments, anything that has stood out to you and what we have seen so far in these first couple days of the pretrial hearings?
Well, to me, it's just telling about the magnitude of evidence that is coming in and the amount of witnesses that are coming in. It tells me that the prosecution really is making sure it fulfills its responsibility and putting its place in the best place possible to tell this judge that our search was proper, it was not improper, and that whatever Mangione said to the police did not require those Miranda warnings for 20 minutes prior and was legal. They know that they don't want to lose that information and evidence.
Much more to come. Jeremy, thank you.
My pleasure.